Hello, this is Professor Keener with some comments about reading poems. First, let's consider what poetry is. Here is a dictionary definition that presents a thoughtful explanation of poetry. Writing that formulates a concentrated, imaginative awareness of experience and language chosen and arranged to create a specific emotional response through meaning, sound, and rhythm. Poetry is concentrated. It's often short and uses condensed language. Poetry is imaginative. Poetry uses special effects of language such as sound and rhythm. And most importantly, poetry conveys the human experience and emotion. Here's another definition of poetry by American poet Robert Frost. It begins in delight and ends in wisdom, in a clarification of life, not necessarily a great clarification such as sex and cults are founded on, but in a momentary stay against confusion. I personally like Frost's emphasis on a clarification of life and not necessarily a great clarification. Poetry crystallizes human experience, maybe a profound moment or maybe a simple everyday event or experience. I realize students often feel intimidated by poems. They might think they don't or can't understand a poem. But remember, a poem is a form of writing, a communication of experience. Because poems are concentrated, they may take more time and effort to read and understand. But you can do it. Here are my best suggestions for reading and understanding poems. First, find a quiet place where you can read, think, and write. Because poems are concentrated, they will take concentration to understand and appreciate. Take notes as you read. It's often helpful to have a dictionary handy to check the meaning of words. Read about the author or about the poem, information that appears in our textbook immediately before each poem. And this can help you place the poem, can help you understand the theme or the author. You will need to read a poem several times to fully understand and appreciate it. Try reading aloud as well as silently. Often you will hear the language better if you speak the poem aloud. When you read, try to focus on parts that you don't understand, because those are the parts that you'll want to figure out. Also, pay attention to the use of language in the poem. Here's a poem we can read together, The Thought Fox by Ted Hughes. Ted Hughes is an English poet who lived from 1930 to 1998. The Thought Fox was published in 1957 in Hughes's first book of poems. Hughes was a well-regarded poet and was the Poet Laureate of England for many years. The Thought Fox. I imagine this midnight moment's forest. Something else is alive besides the clock's loneliness and this blank page where my fingers move. Through the window I see no star. Something more near, though deeper within darkness, is entering the loneliness. Cold, delicately as the dark snow, a fox's nose touches twig, leaf. Two eyes serve a movement that now and again, now and now and now, sets neat prints into the snow between trees, and warily a lame shadow lags by stump in hollow of a body that's bold to come. Across clearings, an eye, a widening, deepening greenness, brilliantly, concentratedly, coming about its own business, till, with sudden sharp hot stink of fox, it enters the dark hole of the head. The window is starless still. The clock ticks. The page is printed. For the sake of time, we'll not read the poem again, although you probably should. Now, we'll try to get the gist of the poem. What do you think the poem is about? The first stanza gives some clues that the poem is about a writer writing. Notice there is a blank page and fingers move, which suggest writing. Also, the late hour, midnight, and the clock suggest a writer working late. Remember to always ground your ideas about the poem in the poem itself. That is, you should be able to point to words or phrases or punctuation or structure to explain your interpretation. The speaker seems to be a writer. How do we know this? In the first stanza, a blank page is mentioned. At the very end of the poem, the page is printed. It would seem the speaker is a writer, and during the course of the poem, he's written on the page. So we can say the speaker is a writer, a poet perhaps, and he's writing late at night because it's midnight. Now let's notice how the poem uses language. For instance, pay attention to the words. Remember, there are not a lot of words in a poem, so you can assume that the words are there, were chosen very carefully to create a certain effect, and are there for certain reasons. For example, the poem opens with the words, "I imagine." These words could suggest the speaker in the poem is thinking, that he's imagining something. Maybe he's imagining what he might write on the blank page. Maybe he's imagining what he sees through the window. More than one interpretation might be possible, but it seems important that the speaker is using his imagination. Notice how the poem uses other elements, such as punctuation. In the first stanza, a colon comes at the end of the first line. A colon suggests an explanation or clarification of what has just been stated. This colon appears to introduce what the speaker imagines, that something else is alive. Notice here the use of a vague word, something. I find that odd in a poem. Someone who usually uses precise and skilled language, like a poet, would use such a vague word. Well, that leads me to the next point. Focus on the parts of the poem you're confused about. Think about these. Ask yourself questions. Brainstorm for ideas or answers. Write about the poem. Talk about it with friends or classmates. Try to make sense of the confusing parts. Perhaps you were confused about the something else, or how could this be alive? Could this be a creature in the night? Could it be the fox referred to in the title? Or is it something not real, only something the writer imagines? Play around with the ideas and the possibilities. Think about other aspects of the poem, such as structure or rhythm or rhyme, whatever is unique to that poem. For instance, this poem does not use rhyme, so that would not be a feature of the poem to focus on. However, there does seem to be a metaphor running throughout the poem. Perhaps the fox could represent something else. Well, we'll not have time to figure out this poem in this one presentation, but you can learn how to approach a poem, read and reread a poem, think about it, write about it, look carefully at the poem itself, think about who the speaker is and what the situation is. Notice the words, the punctuation, the structure, the rhyme, whatever use of language is most important in that poem. Play around with different ideas and possible interpretations, but be sure your ideas come from the poem itself. In class, in the discussion area, read and think about the ideas other students and this teacher have posted about poems. Be willing to change your mind and have an open idea about the poem. Finally, to read a poem, you'll need to be persistent. But the more you read and think, the clearer the poem should become. Focus on the parts of the poem that don't make sense and try to figure these out. And try to make sense of the whole poem. And last but not least, have some fun and enjoy reading poems.